300 bit per second modem in it, so you could do multimedia communications at 300 bits per second with this tiny little keyboard and a screen about that big. This was called the display phone. And they ended up building this product, and of course nobody wanted to buy it. It was a giant waste of time and effort. Well, it's back again, and now they're called integrated multimedia IP phones. And the idea here is we get a telephone that's got a keyboard on it, it's got a little display, and it's got a processor, and then you can surf the web on your telephone and read your email. Now this all sounds great, but you can certainly tell that the people who came up with marketing this stuff are in the sell the sizzle instead of the steak camp. Because when you start thinking about this, what we're talking about doing is putting a device on the desktop that's got a little processor in it that's running some non-standard operating system like OS 9 or something like that. It's not Windows XP. And it's got a tiny little keyboard, a little display, hardly any memory, and we're going to tell the user that they should surf the web on that thing instead of on the desktop computer sitting right beside it that has a flat screen this big and a big keyboard and an 80 megabyte hard drive and 512 megabytes of RAM and a Pentium 4 processor in it. I'm not so sure this sounds like a good idea of putting yet another device on the desktop. First of all, do people want to have another square foot of their desk taken away? And then putting a device that has significantly lower capabilities than a desktop PC, but duplicating those functions, and then two people use this one and not that one. And these things are not cheap. They're like $2,500 for one of these telephones. But that's just the beginning of the story, because then you have to have a whole support department. You have to train people how to use these little telephones with little screens and keyboards. You have to have a help desk. You have to have technicians. You have to have spare parts. So when you start looking at this, these things look cool. But the idea of replacing your desktop computer with some little thing about this big, very limited capability on a box sitting right beside the desktop computer, it doesn't make much sense when you think about it in the long run. What we really want to do is have a plastic thing with a speaker and a microphone and a cord and some buttons, and use this to get the voice into the voice over IP system, and then have a thing with a display about that big and a keyboard and a processor and memory to do the control part of the story. So I would be tending towards the cheap telephones and control on the desktop rather than the very expensive telephones and duplicate the capabilities of the desktop on the phone. Now, if you want to get carried away, you could say, well, let's get rid of the telephone altogether, and we'll run a software application on the desktop to be the phone, and this is called a soft phone. I've seen studies. People do not like using soft phones. They want a plastic thing with a speaker and a microphone and a cord and some buttons. And the fact that that's plugged into the LAN versus the PBX wiring, they'd prefer not to even know about that. The idea of telling them get rid of your telephone and use your mouse and a graphical interface to dial telephone numbers, well, what we would want is that the vendor of the system throws that in as a freebie, and you can let power users who like the idea of having a headset and, you know, direct dialing and stuff like that, they can use that, but 95% of your users will refuse to use a soft phone.